From walking around movie sets in her underwear to pouring water on Ginger Rogers' mink coat, Katharine Hepburn was Hollywood's ultimate rebel who broke every rule in the book. While most stars conformed to studio expectations, Hepburn lived by her own eccentric code, taking ice baths in her 80s, wearing white Reebok sneakers under formal gowns, and changing her birth date to honor her deceased brother. Her outrageous behavior scandalized Hollywood executives, but audiences couldn't get enough of this fearless woman who literally redefined what it meant to be a movie star. Here are 15 things you never knew about Katharine Hepburn. Fact 1. She stripped to her underwear for pants. Katharine Hepburn's very first clash with Hollywood's dress code happened on her debut film, A Bill of Divorcement, in 1932, and it set the tone for her entire rebellious career. The young actress had arrived at RKO Studios wearing her comfortable old blue jeans, which was absolutely unheard of for a leading lady during Hollywood's golden age, when female stars were expected to dress like glamorous dolls, even between takes. The studio executives were horrified by Hepburn's casual attire and decided to teach her a lesson about proper Hollywood behavior. While she was busy filming scenes, they snuck into her dressing room and confiscated her beloved jeans, thinking this would force her to conform to their expectations and wear the skirts and dresses they deemed appropriate for a movie star. But Katharine Hepburn was not the type of woman to be bullied by studio executives, and her response was far more dramatic than anyone expected. When she discovered her pants were missing, she made an ultimatum that shocked everyone on the lot. Rather than give in to the studio's demands, Hepburn stripped down to her underwear and began walking around the entire RKO studio complex, refusing to put on any other clothing until her jeans were returned. Picture this scene: a defiant young actress in her undergarments, calmly strolling past sound stages, office buildings, and crowds of stunned crew members, all while maintaining her dignity and making her point crystal clear. The studio executives quickly realized they had underestimated their new star's determination and stubbornness. Faced with the embarrassing spectacle of their leading lady parading around in her underwear, the executives had no choice but to surrender. They promptly returned Hepburn's confiscated jeans, and she got dressed as if nothing unusual had happened. This bold move established her reputation as someone who would never compromise her personal values for Hollywood's expectations, and it was just the beginning of her lifelong battle against the industry's attempts to control how she dressed and behaved. Fact 2. Changed her birth date for her brother. One of Katharine Hepburn's most closely guarded secrets involved a heartbreaking family tragedy that shaped her entire life, and she kept this secret from the public for over 60 years. When Hepburn was just 13 years old in 1921, she and her 15-year-old brother Tom were visiting New York City during their Easter break, staying with a family friend in Greenwich Village. The siblings had been incredibly close, and Tom was especially excited about this trip, telling everyone it was one of the best experiences of his life. But on the morning after they had enjoyed a pleasant evening at the theater, Hepburn made a discovery that would haunt her forever. She found her beloved older brother hanging from the attic ceiling, having used a curtain tie to end his life. The Hepburn family was devastated by Tom's death, and young Katharine was completely shattered by losing the brother she adored. The family maintained publicly that Tom's death was the result of a magic trick gone wrong, since he had experimented with mock-hanging stunts before, but the truth was much darker. Suicide ran in the Hepburn family, with 2 uncles, a great-uncle, and her grandfather all having taken their own lives. In her grief, and as a way to honor Tom's memory, Katharine made a decision that she would maintain for decades. She officially changed her birth date from May 12th to November 8th, which had been Tom's birthday, essentially giving up her own identity to keep her brother's memory alive. This wasn't just a private memorial gesture, but became part of her official records and public persona. For more than 60 years, Hepburn lived with this lie, celebrating Tom's birthday as her own, and never revealing the truth to journalists, biographers, or even close friends. It wasn't until she published her autobiography called Me Stories of My Life that she finally confessed to this decades-long deception, explaining how the loss of her brother had driven her to literally adopt his identity as part of her own. Fact 3. Demanded her husband change his name. Katharine Hepburn's controlling nature showed itself even before she became a movie star, and nowhere was this more apparent than in her demands surrounding her first and only marriage in 1928. When she married Philadelphia businessman Ludlow Ogden Smith, shortly after graduating from Bryn Mawr College, most people expected the young bride to follow tradition and take her husband's surname, but Hepburn had completely different plans. The problem wasn't that Hepburn objected to changing her name in general, but rather that she absolutely refused to become Catherine Smith because there was already a very famous entertainer using a similar name. Kate Smith was a popular and well-known radio singer during this time period, but she was also quite large and heavy-set, which was the complete opposite of Hepburn's slim and athletic image. Hepburn was so determined to avoid any confusion with the portly radio star that she came up with an unusual solution that showed just how much control she expected to have in her marriage. Instead of taking her husband's name or keeping her own, she demanded that Ludlow legally change his entire name to accommodate her preferences. The poor man was forced to rearrange his own identity, transforming from Ludlow Ogden Smith into S. Ogden Ludlow, essentially flipping his first and last names around so that Hepburn could become Mrs. Ludlow without being associated with Kate Smith. This meant that her new husband had to go through all the legal paperwork and bureaucratic hassle of officially changing his name, not for his own reasons, but simply to satisfy his wife's concerns about public image. What makes this story even more remarkable is that Ludlow apparently went along with this demand without much protest, showing just how persuasive and strong-willed Hepburn could be even as a young woman in her early 20s. The marriage only lasted 6 years before they divorced in 1934, but remarkably, despite Hepburn's controlling behavior and her own admission that she treated him poorly, the two remained close friends for the rest of their lives. Fact 4. Only wore white Reebok sneakers on set. By the time Katharine Hepburn reached her 80s, she had developed some truly eccentric habits that baffled everyone who worked with her, and perhaps none was more unusual than her absolute obsession with wearing white Reebok high-top sneakers on every single movie set. This quirky footwear choice became so much a part of her identity that crew members and fellow actors knew they could always spot Hepburn by looking down at her feet. Actor Jason Bateman, who worked with the legendary actress on one of her final films called This Can't Be Love in 1994, revealed this bizarre detail in an interview with New York Magazine years later. According to Bateman, Hepburn refused to wear any other type of shoe while filming, insisting on her white Reebok sneakers whether she was rehearsing, shooting scenes, or just hanging around the set between takes. What made this habit even more strange was Hepburn's creative solution for scenes that required her character to wear more formal or elegant footwear. Rather than actually changing into the appropriate shoes that the costume department provided, she came up with her own workaround that was both practical and completely ridiculous. Whenever a scene called for her to wear dress shoes, heels, or any other type of fancy footwear, Hepburn would simply pull a pair of black socks over her beloved white Reebok sneakers. This meant that audiences watching her films had no idea that underneath what appeared to be sophisticated shoes, the 80-something actress was actually wearing athletic sneakers covered by socks. The costume and camera departments had to work around this unusual demand, making sure that her feet were filmed in ways that wouldn't reveal the deception, or that the black socks actually looked convincing as formal shoes. Hepburn's insistence on comfort over appearance, even when it meant potentially compromising the visual authenticity of her performances, showed just how set in her ways she had become by this stage of her career, and how little she cared about conventional expectations even when the cameras were rolling. Fact 5. Poured water on Ginger Rogers' mink coat. One of the most outrageous incidents in Katharine Hepburn's career happened during the filming of Stage Door in 1937, when she committed what most people would consider an unforgivable act against a fellow actress's expensive wardrobe. Ginger Rogers, who was already famous for her dancing partnership with Fred Astaire, had arrived on set proudly showing off a brand new mink coat that was undoubtedly worth a small fortune. While Rogers was flaunting her luxurious new purchase and receiving compliments from other cast and crew members, Hepburn apparently became suspicious about whether the coat was actually made from genuine mink fur. Instead of simply asking Rogers about the coat's authenticity or keeping her doubts to herself, Hepburn decided to conduct her own impromptu test using a method that was both scientifically questionable and socially outrageous. Without any warning or permission, Hepburn walked up to Rogers and deliberately poured a full cup of water directly onto the expensive mink coat, completely soaking the fur while Rogers and everyone else on set watched in shock. When people demanded to know why she had done such a thing, Hepburn calmly explained her reasoning as if her behavior was perfectly logical and justified. According to Hepburn, she believed that if the coat was made from real mink fur, the water wouldn't cause it to shrink or become damaged. But if it was fake fur, the water would reveal its poor quality. This explanation, however, did nothing to calm Rogers or anyone else who witnessed the incident, since most people understood that dumping water on someone's expensive clothing was completely inappropriate, regardless of the scientific reasoning behind it. The media immediately began speculating about what had motivated Hepburn's bizarre behavior, with many reporters suggesting that jealousy might have played a role since Rogers was romantically linked to Howard Hughes, who had previously been involved with Hepburn. When Rogers was later asked about the incident in interviews, she refused to engage with the drama, simply saying she had no idea why Hepburn had acted so strangely. Fact 6. Survived hurricane and lost her Oscar? On September 21, 1938, Katharine Hepburn found herself in the middle of one of the most devastating natural disasters in American history, and she barely escaped with her life during what became known as the Great New England Hurricane. Hepburn was staying at her beloved family home in Fenwick, Connecticut, which sat right on the coast and was completely exposed to the fury of the massive storm that was barreling up the eastern seaboard. The hurricane was an absolute monster that would ultimately kill at least 682 people and cause catastrophic damage across New England, but weather forecasting in 1938 was nowhere near as advanced as it is today, so most people had very little warning about what was coming. According to some reports, Hepburn was at the family home considering a marriage proposal from billionaire Howard Hughes, though she was also dealing with her career being at a low point after being labeled box office poison by theater owners. As the storm intensified and the situation became increasingly dangerous, Hepburn realized that staying in the house would likely mean death for herself, her family members, and the household servants who were with them. The wind and rain were so powerful that the entire structure was beginning to shake and groan under the assault, and it became clear that they needed to evacuate immediately or risk being trapped inside when the building collapsed. In a desperate escape that happened just in the nick of time, Hepburn and everyone else in the house fled on foot through the howling wind and driving rain, abandoning all their possessions as they ran for higher ground and safety. Within minutes of their escape, the family home was completely destroyed when the hurricane's storm surge washed it away, along with everything inside, including furniture, personal belongings, and family heirlooms that had been collected over many years. Among the items lost in the destruction was Hepburn's Academy Award that she had won for her performance in Morning Glory in 1933, her very first Oscar triumph. Remarkably, the golden statue was later discovered completely intact, somehow having survived the hurricane's destruction and been found among the debris after the storm passed. Fact 7. Never attended her own Oscar ceremonies. Katharine Hepburn holds the record as the most decorated performer in Academy Awards history, with 4 Best Actress wins, but she also holds another much more unusual record that perfectly captures her rebellious attitude toward Hollywood's biggest night. Despite being nominated for 12 Oscars throughout her career and winning 4 of them, Hepburn never once showed up to accept any of her awards in person, making her the ultimate no-show at the ceremony that every other actor desperately wants to attend. Her 4 Oscar wins came for Morning Glory in 1933, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner in 1967, The Lion in Winter in 1968, and On Golden Pond in 1981, spanning nearly 50 years of her career. Each time her name was announced as the winner, the audience would look around expectantly, only to realize that Hepburn simply wasn't there and had no intention of participating in what she considered Hollywood's self-congratulatory spectacle. The one and only time Hepburn ever appeared at an Academy Awards ceremony was in 1974 when she was 67 years old. But even then she wasn't there for herself. She had agreed to present the Irving Thalberg Award to her longtime friend Lawrence Weingarten, and when she walked onto the stage to thunderous applause and a standing ovation, she delivered a typically witty and self-deprecating comment that brought down the house. Looking out at the audience of Hollywood's biggest stars who were clearly thrilled to finally see the legendary actress at the ceremony, Hepburn quipped that she was living proof that a person can wait 41 years to be unselfish. This joke was a perfect reference to the fact that she had avoided the ceremony for over 4 decades, only showing up when it was about honoring someone else rather than celebrating her own achievements. Hepburn's consistent absence from the Oscar ceremonies was part of her larger rejection of Hollywood's publicity machine and her belief that the work itself should speak louder than any awards or recognition. She famously avoided interviews, refused to sign autographs, and generally treated the entertainment industry's obsession with celebrity culture with complete disdain throughout her entire career. Fact 8. Her voice inspired Hannibal Lecter. One of the most unexpected connections in movie history links Katharine Hepburn's elegant speaking style to one of cinema's most terrifying villains, and this bizarre connection was revealed by Anthony Hopkins himself when he explained how he developed the chilling voice for Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs. Hopkins, who won an Academy Award for his bone-chilling performance as the brilliant but cannibalistic psychiatrist, drew inspiration from several sources when creating the character's distinctive way of speaking. The connection between Hepburn and Hannibal Lecter came about because Hopkins had worked with Hepburn decades earlier in the film The Lion in Winter from 1968, where she played Eleanor of Aquitaine and he played her son, Richard the Lionheart. During the filming of that historical drama, Hopkins became fascinated with Hepburn's very particular way of speaking, which combined her natural Connecticut accent with the refined diction she had developed during her years in theater. Hepburn's voice was famous for its distinctive qualities, including her crisp pronunciation, her tendency to emphasize certain syllables in unexpected ways, and her habit of speaking with a kind of controlled precision that made every word sound deliberate and important. She had what many people called a mid-Atlantic accent, which was a cultivated way of speaking that combined American and British pronunciation patterns and was popular among wealthy and educated people during the early to mid-20th century. When Hopkins was preparing for his role as Hannibal Lecter more than 20 years later, he remembered how Hepburn's voice had this quality of being both cultured and slightly unsettling, with an underlying sense of intelligence and control that could be either charming or intimidating depending on the context. Hopkins took these vocal characteristics that he had observed in Hepburn and twisted them into something much darker and more menacing for his portrayal of the sophisticated but deadly psychiatrist. The result was a voice that combined Hepburn's precise diction and measured delivery with a sinister undertone that made Hannibal Lecter seem both refined and terrifying, creating one of the most memorable villain voices in movie history through an unexpected connection to one of Hollywood's most beloved leading ladies. Fact 9. Did all her own stunts until her 70s. Katharine Hepburn's perfectionist attitude and need for control extended far beyond her wardrobe choices and personal behavior, reaching into the dangerous territory of performing her own movie stunts well into her 70s, when most actresses would have gladly let professionals handle the risky work. Hepburn's reasoning for insisting on doing her own stunts was both practical and completely typical of her demanding personality, as she explained that she simply couldn't stand the way stunt women carried themselves and moved on camera. According to Hepburn, the professional stunt performers that studios hired to double for actresses never stood up straight enough to convincingly portray her characters, and this drove her absolutely crazy because she had spent her entire life maintaining perfect posture and athletic grace. Rather than accept what she saw as substandard body language from her stunt doubles, Hepburn decided it was easier and more authentic for her to simply perform the dangerous sequences herself, regardless of the potential risks to her safety. Some of the most memorable examples of Hepburn's insistence on doing her own stunts can be seen in films like Bringing Up Baby from 1938, where audiences can actually watch her dangling precariously from Cary Grant's grip as they hang from scaffolding high above the ground. That terrifying moment where she appears to be in genuine danger wasn't created with movie magic or camera tricks, but was actually Hepburn herself hanging in midair while trusting her co-star and the film crew to keep her from falling. Perhaps the most dangerous stunt Hepburn ever performed was during the filming of Summertime in 1955, when her character was supposed to fall backward into a canal in Venice, Italy. Despite warnings about the questionable quality of the water, Hepburn insisted on doing the fall herself rather than using a stunt double, and she ended up diving directly into the contaminated Venetian canal water that was filled with pollution and bacteria. Even as she aged, Hepburn continued this reckless behavior, performing horseback riding scenes across dangerous terrain for Rooster Cogburn in 1975 when she was 68 years old, and diving into freezing cold water for On Golden Pond in 1981 at age 74. Fact 10. Took ice baths every morning until 96. Perhaps the most extreme and long-lasting of all Katharine Hepburn's unusual habits was her daily ritual of taking ice-cold baths or showers every single morning from childhood until the day she died at age 96, a practice that shocked everyone who learned about it and perfectly captured her belief that discomfort was somehow good for the soul. This wasn't just an occasional health kick or a temporary phase that she went through, but rather a lifelong commitment to what most people would consider a form of daily torture. The habit began during Hepburn's childhood in Connecticut, where her father, Thomas Hepburn, encouraged all of his children to embrace physical challenges and discomfort as a way of building character and maintaining good health. The Hepburn family believed strongly in the philosophy that the bitterer the medicine, the better it was for you, and this cold water routine was just one example of how they put this harsh theory into practice every day. While most children would have rebelled against such an unpleasant daily requirement, young Katharine embraced the ice-cold baths and carried the practice with her throughout her entire life, no matter where she was living or working. Whether she was in a luxurious Hollywood hotel, her family home in Connecticut, or on location for a movie in some remote part of the world, Hepburn made sure to start every morning with a shock of freezing water that would leave most people gasping and shivering. Even when she was in her 80s and living at her beloved seaside retreat in Fenwick, Connecticut, Hepburn continued this brutal morning routine, often breaking through ice to swim in the Long Island Sound during winter months, when the water temperature was so cold that it could be dangerous for someone her age. She genuinely believed that this daily dose of extreme cold was responsible for her remarkable longevity and excellent health. And she would often give this advice to younger people who complained about minor aches and pains. Hepburn was known to quote her father's saying about bitter medicine whenever people expressed amazement at her cold water habits, and she remained convinced until the end of her life that this uncomfortable daily ritual was one of the secrets to living a long and healthy life. Fact 11. Had a secret friendship with Michael Jackson. One of the most unexpected and surprising friendships in Katharine Hepburn's later life was her fascination with pop superstar Michael Jackson, a relationship that seemed completely impossible given their vastly different backgrounds, generations, and approaches to fame. This unlikely connection was revealed years later by Scott Berg in his biography called Kate Remembered, where he shared details about Hepburn's genuine interest in the king of pop that shocked many people who knew her. According to Berg's account, Hepburn had developed what could only be described as a protective fascination with Michael Jackson, whom she viewed as a fellow artist who was struggling with the pressures and isolation that came with extraordinary fame. She referred to Jackson as this strange artistic creature living in a bubble, barely touched by anything in the outside world, and she seemed to recognize something of herself in his eccentric behavior and his attempts to maintain privacy despite constant public scrutiny. The most remarkable part of their friendship was that Jackson actually visited Hepburn on the set of On Golden Pond in 1981, where the 74-year-old actress took it upon herself to offer career advice to the 23-year-old pop star who was at the height of his fame. This meeting happened during a time when Jackson was becoming increasingly interested in acting and was considering various film projects, so Hepburn's guidance would have been incredibly valuable coming from someone with her decades of experience in Hollywood. The fact that these two completely different entertainers found common ground speaks to Hepburn's ability to recognize artistic talent and emotional vulnerability regardless of someone's age, musical genre, or public image. Hepburn, who had spent her entire career avoiding the spotlight and rejecting Hollywood's attempts to control her image, apparently saw in Jackson a kindred spirit who was also struggling to maintain his authentic self while dealing with unprecedented levels of fame and media attention. This friendship also showed a softer, more nurturing side of Hepburn that contradicted her reputation for being difficult and self-centered, revealing that she was capable of genuine concern and mentorship for younger artists who were facing similar challenges in the entertainment industry. Fact 12. Posed for nude photos in her 20s. In one of the most shocking revelations from her autobiography, Me, Stories of My Life, Katharine Hepburn casually admitted to something that would have been absolutely scandalous if it had been discovered during her early Hollywood career, confessing that she had posed for nude photographs when she was a young woman in her 20s. This admission came as a complete surprise to readers and biographers who thought they knew everything about the famously private actress, and it revealed yet another example of her willingness to break social conventions even before she became a movie star. The nude photography sessions apparently took place during the late 1920s, around the time when Hepburn was just starting her acting career, and before she had achieved any significant fame or recognition in Hollywood. During this period, she was still a relatively unknown performer trying to make her way in theater, and posing for artistic nude photographs was something that would have been considered extremely risque and potentially career-ending for any respectable young woman, especially one from a wealthy and socially prominent family like the Hepburns. What makes this revelation even more intriguing is that Hepburn mentioned in her autobiography that these nude photographs were later lost, though she didn't provide many details about exactly how or when they disappeared. Many people who have studied Hepburn's life and career believe that the pictures were probably deliberately destroyed, either by Hepburn herself or by studio executives who realized that such images could be used to damage her reputation and career if they ever became public. The timing of when these photos might have been destroyed is particularly interesting because it was likely during the early 1930s when Hepburn was first becoming a major Hollywood star, and the studios were working hard to carefully craft and control her public image. During this era, movie studios had enormous power over their actors' personal lives and would go to great lengths to hide or eliminate anything that might cause scandal or controversy. The fact that Hepburn waited until she was in her 80s to reveal this information in her autobiography shows just how carefully she had guarded this secret throughout her entire career, and how little she cared about shocking people once she was beyond the reach of Hollywood's judgment. Fact 13. Was labeled box office poison. In 1938, Katharine Hepburn received what was arguably the most devastating professional insult of her entire career when the Independent Theater Owners Association of New York officially published a list of actors they considered box office poison. And Hepburn's name appeared prominently among the stars they claimed were hurting movie attendance and losing money for theaters across the country. This public declaration was essentially the movie industry's way of saying that Hepburn had become so unpopular with audiences that her presence in a film would actually drive people away from theaters rather than attract them. The box office poison label came after a series of commercial failures that had seriously damaged Hepburn's reputation as a bankable movie star, including films like Spitfire in 1934, Mary of Scotland in 1936, and most notably Bringing Up Baby in 1938, which is now considered a classic screwball comedy, but was a complete flop when it was first released. These failures were particularly embarrassing because they came after Hepburn had won an Academy Award for Morning Glory and had been hailed as one of Hollywood's most promising new talents. What made the situation even more humiliating was that Hepburn's unpopularity wasn't just about her movie choices, but also about her public image and behavior, which many audiences found arrogant, cold, and off-putting. Her refusal to conform to Hollywood's expectations for female stars, combined with her difficult relationship with the press and her tendency to be rude to fans, had created a situation where people actively disliked her as a person, not just as a performer. However, Hepburn's response to this devastating criticism was absolutely typical of her defiant personality and unshakable confidence. Rather than retreating from the spotlight or apologizing for her behavior, she laughed off the box office poison label and fired back at her critics with characteristic wit and stubbornness. In an interview with the Daily News, she pointed out that Bringing Up Baby had actually grossed $2 million and Stage Door had earned more than $2.5 million, saying, "If I weren't laughing so hard, I might cry, but why should I?" Fact 14. Never watched Spencer Tracy's final film. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of Katharine Hepburn's 26-year relationship with Spencer Tracy was revealed in her decision to never watch Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the 1967 film that marked both the end of their legendary screen partnership and the final performance of Tracy's career before his death. Despite having starred alongside Tracy in this groundbreaking movie about interracial marriage and having earned her second Academy Award for her performance in it, Hepburn found the emotional weight of watching Tracy's last work too overwhelming to bear. Tracy had been in failing health during the production of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and everyone involved with the film knew that his days were numbered, but he was determined to complete this important project that tackled the controversial subject of racial prejudice in America. The filming process was particularly difficult because Tracy was visibly weak and struggling with his lines, yet he pushed through with characteristic professionalism and dedication to finish what would become his final statement as an actor. The tragedy of the situation became even more poignant when Tracy died just 17 days after completing filming, suffering a massive heart attack in the early morning hours at his home while Hepburn was there with him. According to Hepburn's own account, Tracy had gotten up in the middle of the night to get a glass of milk, and she followed him to the kitchen, but arrived just in time to hear the glass shatter and find him collapsed on the floor. Given the circumstances surrounding Tracy's death and the fact that Guess Who's Coming to Dinner represented the end of both their personal relationship and their professional collaboration, Hepburn simply could not bring herself to watch the finished film. The memories of Tracy struggling through his final performance, combined with the knowledge that she would never work with him again, made the prospect of seeing him on screen too emotionally devastating for her to handle. Instead of attending premieres or screenings of the film, Hepburn chose to remember Tracy through their earlier work together and through private moments, preserving her memories of him as a living, breathing partner, rather than confronting the finality of his death by watching his last performance. Fact 15. Got permanent eye infection from movie stunt. Katharine Hepburn's insistence on performing her own stunts led to many dangerous situations throughout her career, but perhaps the most lasting consequence came during the filming of Summertime in 1955, when a single scene in Venice, Italy left her with a permanent health problem that would plague her for the remaining 48 years of her life. The film required Hepburn's character, Jane Hudson, to accidentally fall backward into one of Venice's famous canals during a romantic moment, and true to form, Hepburn refused to let a stunt double perform this seemingly simple but potentially hazardous sequence. The problem wasn't the fall itself, which Hepburn executed perfectly, but rather the condition of the water she was diving into, which was far more dangerous than anyone on the film crew had anticipated. Venice's canals in the 1950s were essentially open sewers that carried not only regular city waste, but also industrial pollution, chemical runoff, and all manner of bacteria and contaminants that made the water completely unsuitable for human contact, let alone for someone to be fully submerged in it. Despite warnings from local authorities and crew members about the questionable quality of the canal water, Hepburn dismissed their concerns and insisted on doing the stunt herself because she believed it would look more authentic and dramatic than using a double or creating the scene with special effects. She was determined to give the most realistic performance possible, even if it meant putting her health at risk for the sake of artistic integrity. The consequences of this decision became apparent almost immediately after filming the scene, when Hepburn developed a serious eye infection that doctors initially hoped would clear up with proper treatment and medication. However, the contaminated Venice canal water had introduced such a potent mix of bacteria and pollutants into her system that the infection proved impossible to completely eliminate. Despite the best efforts of medical professionals, this eye infection became a permanent condition that Hepburn had to manage for the rest of her life, requiring ongoing medical treatment and causing her discomfort and vision problems that lasted until her death in 2003. The irony of the situation was that this permanent health consequence came from what should have been one of the safer stunts in her career, proving that sometimes the most ordinary-looking scenes can be the most dangerous.